Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later we'll be talking energy policy and how that's changing the world. But first, who's running for Senate on the Republican side here in Colorado? From the Denver Post, you know him, you love him. He knows how to tie a necktie. It's John Frank. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
And Quincy, oh my God, I forgot your last name already because you're too young. From the Aurora Sentinel. Good to have you here, Quincy.
Snowdon.
Oh, that's right. I was joking about that.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's
it's popular these days.
Yeah. Alzheimer's is wonderful. You're going to love it. Trust me.
Looking forward to it.
And so here from the Aurora Sentinel is, I forgot your name again?
Quincy Snowdon.
All right. When this race started, well, let's go back. 2 years ago, Republicans were able to beat a pretty popular United States senator because, one, he screwed up in his campaign. Udall really, was up in everyone's uterus, and that ended up not working for him. But we had a charismatic, relatively younger guy who cleared the field for Republicans. We don't have that. Give me the situation we have this year.
Yeah, in February of this year, so 2 years after Cory Gardner did clear the field on the Republican side to beat Mark Udall, as you mentioned, we had 10, if not 14 candidates in the race at that point. We're down to 5 now, which seems manageable given the numbers we were previously, but still a 5-way race for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate is a wide open contest. And what I find most fascinating here is we don't have a precedent for this in Colorado to have a competitive June primary with an all mail-in ballot. It really is anyone's game, and it's going to really set the standard for these kind of races going forward.
And for people who don't know, there's 2 ways to get on the ballot. You can either go through the state convention, or you can petition on. And so at the state convention, we had, what, 3 or 4 people running, and 10, right. But only one cleared it, and that was Darrell Glenn from Colorado Springs. That was a real upset too, because there were some other folks who thought it would go elsewhere. How do people petition on to avoid the caucus system?
Well, this year, so candidates had to get 1,500 valid signatures from voters registered to their party. So in this case, Republicans from each of Colorado's 7 congressional districts. And that has caused a whole ocean of confusion and muck. For
If I understand the rules, you have to get 15,000 valid signatures statewide, but you need something like 1,000, is it 1,000, from each of the 7 congressional districts. And to make it even better, if you sign the petition for guy number 1 and he sends in the petition and it gets certified, you can't sign it for guy number 2. Your name will be invalidated. Do I have that part right?
I believe so, yes. Right. And I may have misspoke, but it's 1,500 signatures in each district.
Yeah. 1,500 and 15,000 altogether. I think that's right. So who was the first to get on? Who's on first?
By petition.
Where?
It was Jack Graham, if I'm not mistaken, who is the former athletic director from Colorado State University. And he's the only one who is able to make it without any sort of snafus.
So he gets on, no problem. And by being the first guy on, all 1,500 people who assigned his, technically if they sign another one, those don't count. So who?
It all depends on when you turn them in.
Right.
So there's a dispute about this in the law right now, and former Secretary of State Scott Gessler took this argument to the Supreme Court, which punted on it, to be honest. But the question is, as the state applies it now, it's the first person to turn in their signatures. That name counts for them, and that name cannot count for anyone else. But some contend it's whose petition you signed first, regardless of when it's turned in. So there's a bit of a legal wrangling, as with most election law on that one. But yes, that disqualified a number of signatures for most of the other candidates. If voters were able to sign more than one petition, you may not have seen some of these candidates have to go to court to get on the ballot because they were that far. There were that many double counted signatures here.
Wow. And can we go through the names? Help me with the names here, because we have, Graham came on, he was in, and then you had Blaha from Colorado Springs, former mayor. You had Ryan Frazier, former city council member from Aurora. You had John Kaiser, 1 year in the state legislature. All of them bringing in, is there anybody else that I'm missing? No,
well, you're forgetting Darrell Glenn because he made
and
it through the
Darrell Glenn's
convention process. His
right.
name will be first on the
Right.
ballot because he made it through the state GOP convention.
Right. So out of all these folks, Kaiser doesn't make it, Blaha doesn't make it, Frazier doesn't make it, and then Blaha makes it, Kaiser makes it, and Frazier makes it back on. How did that happen? Give me the story.
Yeah, so it has been about a month-long process, almost to the day, for those three candidates to kind of make their way through the court system and hiring attorneys. Former Secretary of State Scott Gessler was representing Ryan Frazier, but it was essentially kind of a slog to see how many signatures they could get overturned or get the Secretary of State to accept, although he had originally rejected them. And it was just kind of chipping away at the total they needed until inevitably all three of them have now solidified spots on the ballot.
But just by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah.
I mean, this was one vote here, one vote there, which makes you wonder, you needed to know this stuff before you went on. Let me ask you kind of the political side of this. How did Jon Kaiser handle this from a reporting point of view? Because I heard a quote of, "We're going to be on the ballot." And it's like, oh, okay, but that doesn't really explain it. I think he really missed an opportunity to get to know reporters, get to know the community by explaining why he was doing what he was doing. Maybe all of them had that problem.
It's a tough situation. You've got to go to court to make the ballot. That's not something, any candidate wants to do, but it all comes down to a difference in the legal standard. The court can apply a substantial compliance standard, which is you don't have to follow the law exactly. If there's just a typographical error or a missing notary stamp here, the judge is able to count it where the Secretary of State's office contends it's not allowed to. In terms of Jon Kaiser's issue, we've been going for the past few weeks through his signatures, and there are a number, I think we're up to about 13 or so now, that were forged potentially, where the voters whose names appeared on his petition said they didn't sign it. And there's an investigation pending involving one of the petition circulators hired by a company for his campaign. That's probably what you're referring to. He said he was on the ballot over and over and refused to answer questions about it for weeks. He finally did confront the issue, talk to the Denver Post in an interview, and then confronted the issue again in our debate.
Who forged the signatures?
Their investigation is focusing on one circulator. That is Maureen Moss. She worked for a company called Black Diamond Outreach, run by Steve Adams, which was hired by the Kaiser campaign.
And Black Diamond, if I remember, is more of a left-leaning firm, aren't they?
They've done a number of things. They do a lot of ballot initiatives. Candidate petition gathering is a lot harder than just the ballot initiatives. There are certain requirements about party, of course, and then there's certain requirements about circulators, districts, yes.
So how did this come to light? Because out of 15,000, and they probably dropped, 20,000 signatures, how did this story come out? I mean, all of a sudden it pops out on Channel 7, and I'm thinking, no, stories like that, nobody goes through 20,000 signatures to find the 10 forgeries. The Secretary of State, if I understand it correctly, does sampling, but they don't do a line item unless it's really close. So were these planted fake signatures? Speculate.
I can't necessarily speak to that. I know, the story about the forgeries really did come from Denver 7, and the reporter Marshall and
Zellinger.
Is it okay? I didn't want to mispronounce
Easy for you
his
to
last
say,
name.
Snowdon.
Yeah. But I think it all stemmed from him, and I can't speculate as to how or necessarily why he found the things that he found, but I think the interesting thing is, as you mentioned, the review of the Secretary of State and their inability to go and compare signatures at this point by state statute is something that I believe is the head of the Elections Division, Judge Choate, has said to reporters recently that their hands are somewhat tied at this point, and that they are unable to compare signatures. I know there's an issue with one signee who was later found to be deceased, and kind of corroborating the information there has been tricky.
But you know what I'm talking about here in that to have...
Well, at the start of this is a liberal group.
Right.
I mean, Progress Now Colorado launched this trail, I guess we were on. They had a press conference at the Capitol a couple weeks ago.
But how did they find the signatures? Because having done a lot of petitions in my life and putting things on the ballot and doing this, you know, I don't think a group like Progress Now has the manpower to go through and check 20,000 signatures to find those 10. So somebody tipped them off, I'm guessing, or I've got to wonder, was this done on purpose?
Well, there's an investigation going on. The Denver District Attorney's Office is doing an initial review of this, and the Secretary of State's office has asked for an investigation into the deceased voter's signature. So we may get some of those answers, but it's certainly interesting. When you look through the ones under question, you can see a pattern in the handwriting that stands out. But you're right, you've got to be looking for them, and hopefully the DA's office will be able to give us some of those answers.
Did the Secretary of State do a bad job here? Did their office do their job? I mean, it seems you're telling me that a judge can lower the, you know, you're in substantial compliance.
Which is in the law.
But the Secretary of State can't. And so it makes him look like he did something wrong because a judge overturned it, but in fact, he can do his job, and a judge can lower the standard and get somebody through. Do I understand that correctly?
Essentially, there is still some legal dispute around this issue as well. Former Secretary of State Scott Gessler would contend that the Secretary of State's office is allowed to compare signatures on these petitions to the ones in the voter file that we all submit when we register to vote, and should be doing some of that. This is a complicated process with, as you've mentioned, thousands of signatures here, and so they do sampling, and things do get through. In this case, the Secretary of State's office has admitted some errors because they knew about potential questions with forgeries and knew about the deceased voter's signature for a full month before it was reported to the public. That information just came out recently. The Secretary of State's office says it's taking steps to correct that, you know, change some internal policy, so that won't happen again.
Who wins in June? Who's going to go up against? Do we have any polling number? Do we have any idea out of these 5 guys who's going to challenge Bennet?
The only polling I've seen, and the only public poll, goes back to about December, so nothing recently. Since then, the only polling I've seen is largely based on name ID, and it's all changing right now. Jack Graham's just going up on TV this week. He's going to be on TV through the primary. Robert Blaha's on TV right now. We're just getting into some of these televised debates, so the field is changing right now. More people are tuning into the race, but it's still going to be interesting to watch.
I know another interesting thing that came out, I believe just this morning, is that Blaha received the backing of state lawmaker Tim Neville, who was once the favorite and who did not get the backing he wanted to in the convention.
Couldn't win the convention. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Stay tuned.